Stearman? Really?
Bob Welty told me he learned how to fly in a Stearman. Jack Ford said he's flown one. Says they're real neat, yeah.
How many of these did they make?
Made about 8,000 during the war years and made parts for about 2,000 more. But there aren't that many planes left, but every now and then you'll still see one flying. And we found a real pretty one at the Bountiful Sky Park.
The airplanes have an incredible nostalgia. To anyone that loves airplanes, there's just something about two wings and sitting out in the open that makes them the epitome of flying. Switch. Throttle crack. Here we go. There's nothing like an old radial engine, especially a radial airplane engine like this. I really enjoy starting it up and just hearing it run. It's a different sound, a throatier, deeper roar than the modern airplane engine.
Two wings, two seats, and a loud roar. A combination that Steve Durtschi loves. He's wanted one of these planes since he was a kid, when his dad told him stories about learning to fly during World War II. And when you want one bad enough, you'll do almost anything to get it. 2 years ago, Steve heard about a guy in California who had a Stearman for sale, but it didn't look anything like this one.
It was a bare fuselage. The airplane has a steel tube fuselage, and there was no seats, no instruments, no controls, no wings, no tail wheel.
Steve wrote the guy a check for $14,000 and hauled it home. A rusty old World War II plane, which was converted into a crop duster 10 years ago.
So it was a wreck, basically, when you first saw it.
I wouldn't call it a wreck. A basket case is probably a better term.
So Steve went to work in his garage at first, sanding a piece of metal here, rebuilding a wing on sawhorses there. Every night for the next 2 years, he pounded, glued, and painted.
Many's the nights my wife would hold apart in her pajamas down in the cold basement while I'd fitted.
It was a real family affair. Besides the 14 grand Steve spent to buy this basket case, he shelled out that much again for the parts he didn't have. Everything from wing nuts to propeller.
Was this tough to do?
No, if I can do it, anybody can.
Steve says all you need are the plans, lots of spare time, and an inspector to check your work, right down to the most minute detail.
Anytime I'd mix up a batch of glue, I would have to make test glue joints and date them, and then when the FAA and the inspector would come out, we'd test those joints to failure to make sure that glue was holding exactly like it should, and that I'd mixed it right and it had dried right.
Finally, this past December, it was time to see if the old Stearman would fly. He and pilot Val Judkins knew it would before they ever headed down the runway.
It flies very slow. It wasn't ever designed to fly fast. It cruises at about 90 miles an hour.
This plane has taken 3 maiden flights in its lifetime, during the war years, long before Steve was born, then again when it dusted crops in California. And now it looks like it did back in 1942, probably better. Stearmans are harder to fly than modern-day planes. A little more rudder and aileron control is needed.
But to fly it with grace and poise, like the military wanted you to fly it, would take a certain amount of skills that would develop through time.
Do you fly it with grace and poise?
No.
Even so, he and Val did know something about flying. For example, doing a loop. They found out how to do one from the Stearman flight manual. They decided to try it with one of our cameras mounted on the front of the plane.
So we just accelerated to 120 miles an hour is what the 1942 manual said to do, and hold back the stick and watch the airplane go up and over the top and down the other side.
The manual also explained how to do a roll and pull a few G's.
Out of respect for the old airplane, we don't try not to pull too many. I believe in the loops that we were doing the other day, it was something like 2.5 or 3.
Steve says he never sat in a Stearman until he bought his. And now that he's restored it, he plans to spend lots of time sitting and flying.
Steve says the only problem with flying his plane is that it's real cold up there.
You mentioned he spent, I'm sure it was, $14,000 for the parts he didn't have. Where do you get parts for a Stearman that's 45 years old?
If you're going to build a plane like this from scratch or restore one, you subscribe to something called Trade a Plane. This is the classified ads of every kind of airplane you've ever seen in your life, and you look up under the term Stearman like Steve did, and you just go down the list. If you need wings, you can find wings. If you need a fuselage, you can find a fuselage, or horizontal stabilizers, or a fuel tank, or something like that. It's all in here. Gauges, whatever.
Just like I always wanted.
Yeah, and it comes every 3 weeks, and he lived with this thing. And
Are there a
found
lot
all
of
his
people
parts.
who rebuild planes of that vintage?
There are quite a few. I mean, the thickness of this thing
Yeah,
tells
for
you that.
example.
Steve told me the Experimental Aircraft Association, which is a group that all these guys belong to, estimates that only 10% of anybody who ever tries this actually finishes. Most of the guys get tired, fed up, and they sell the thing. So he's pretty proud that he even finished.
Should be.
Now he
Thanks.
just wants to fly it.
Great story. We'll be back after a break to discuss a proposal that would recognize common law marriage in Utah.